With my wife dying, I thought my world was over. And that's a fact. She was always there. Even if I was on the road and she was, back home in England when we lived here and then in the States, you know what I mean? She was always on the end of the phone.
Linda Trenchard married Tom Jones when she was just 16. She was pregnant, scared, and had no idea her husband would become one of the biggest stars in the world. She also had no idea he would sleep with hundreds of women during their marriage. Yet she stayed. For 59 years, she stayed silent while the scandals piled up. Then came the diagnosis that doctors said was unusually aggressive. She refused painkillers because she wanted to stay awake. She wanted to talk. She wanted to tell Tom something before the end. What were her final words? And why did they haunt him for years after she was gone? Melinda Rose Trenchard entered the world on March 7, 1941, in Pontypridd, Wales, while the war was pressing down on every street and every kitchen table. Her parents, William and Violet, did their best to keep the family afloat under rationing rules that allowed only a few ounces of butter, cheese, and sugar each week. Food was scarce, so most meals were made from potatoes and whatever vegetables they could grow in the garden. Even with these hardships, her arrival brought a quiet warmth to neighbors, who were also dealing with fear, loss, and uncertainty. Her earliest memories would be shaped by the hum of air raid sirens, darkened windows during nightly blackouts, and the distant rumble of bombs falling near the Cardiff docks. Life was tense, yet there was a sense of togetherness in those cramped Welsh streets that held people close, even when the world felt unpredictable. As she grew, her world widened in Treforest, a small village just outside Pontypridd, where her parents owned a little local cinema. Every night, the reels turned, and the glow of Hollywood filled the room. Melinda sat in the flicker of those films, letting stories pull her away from the stress of ration coupons and bomb threats. Classics like Casablanca and Gone with the Wind shaped her imagination. She was only 10 when she began helping her parents with ticket sales, sometimes earning just a few pence, but soaking in lessons about work, responsibility, and the magic of storytelling. The cinema became a haven for locals who needed a break from rebuilding their lives, and Melinda watched people come in tired and leave with lighter hearts. The scent of popcorn became part of her childhood, even though it was a luxury in 1940s Wales. These early years planted a love for movies that stayed with her long after the war faded. When the war ended in 1945, the cinema struggled. People had less time and money for films as they tried to repair homes and piece their routines back together. By 1948, the Trenchard family was barely making enough to stay open. Profits fell sharply, dropping from about £100 a month during the war to less than 20 by the next year. Melinda stepped in wherever she could, selling tickets late into the night and watching her father juggle odd jobs to keep everything running. Many families in South Wales faced the same hardships, and unemployment was still painfully high. Those years forced Melinda to understand money in a way that most children didn't. Every coin mattered, every decision counted, and every hardship taught her to keep pushing. Life in Pontypridd was marked by coal mining poverty. The Trenchards lived in a small one-bedroom home where Melinda shared her space with her siblings. Coal miners earned barely £2 a week, and that wage struggled to stretch far enough to feed entire families. Homes were cramped, cold, and sometimes damp, and most people heated their rooms with bits of coal gathered from local tips. Clothes were washed in cold water because hot water wasn't always available. Melinda watched her father repair machinery by day and help at the cinema by night, often working 12 hours without stopping. These moments formed a clear picture of survival and resilience. They taught her that life could be painful and still somehow full of love. Her strength grew even stronger because of the war's lingering fear. Air raid drills were common in Pontypridd, and Melinda remembered crouching under the cinema seats with her parents as the sirens wailed. The sounds of planes passing overhead became part of her nights, and children learned to stay quiet and calm, even when the world trembled around them. Several bombs fell close to the town in 1941, and even though none hit the cinema, the tension shaped her sense of courage. She learned early that danger could be nearby, and still life had to move forward. Those moments carved out the bravery she would carry for decades. By 1952, her life took a turn she never expected. That was the year she met a boy named Thomas John Woodward, who who the world would later know as Tom Jones. He was 12, just like her, but he spent 2 years bedridden with tuberculosis and spent most days staring out his window. From there, he watched Melinda play marbles outside her home, and her laughter became a bright spot in his long recovery. He often said that watching her was the highlight of his day, and that he dreamed about holding her once he healed. Melinda had no idea she was being watched with such hope, yet those simple moments created the beginning of a bond that would last a lifetime. The friendship deepened quickly, especially during their kiss-chase games in the rainy streets of Treforest. Welsh weather was known for never staying dry for long, and the two of them ran through puddles, ducked into doorways, and chased each other with the kind of joy only children know. Melinda became the favorite among local boys because she was lively and striking, but Tom's eyes were always fixed on her. When he finally caught her during those playful games, the kiss they shared felt different, something she later admitted with a shy smile. Those small moments, simple and soft, were forming the roots of something much bigger. When they reached 15, everything became more serious. They started meeting secretly at a phone box at the end of Tom's street. Wales had endless rainstorms, and the phone box gave them shelter from the drizzle and from nosy parents. They whispered about dreams they were scared to say out loud anywhere else. Tom later said that they were wrapped up in each other in a way that felt unbelievable. He loved the place so much he moved the actual phone box to their Los Angeles home decades later. Those quiet meetings, full of stolen kisses and shared hopes, built the foundation of a marriage that would last 59 years. Melinda's love for movies became something she shared with Tom. Because her family owned the cinema, she grew up watching stars like Elvis Presley and soaking in the sparkle of Hollywood. She worked as an usher, and Tom would listen to the same music while recovering from illness. Both felt pulled toward entertainment. Both had dreams larger than their small town. The cinema softened their days and gave them a place to imagine a future far away from coal dust and gray skies. Still, Melinda didn't make things easy for him. When they danced in local halls during the 1950s, she teased him by pretending to ignore his attempts to win her over. She laughed as he tried to catch her attention, but slowly she let him in. Tom always said she was the most attractive girl in the hall, and he felt proud when she finally chose him. The halls, filled with music and young energy, became the backdrop for a romance that was no longer just playful, but deeply real. Everything changed on March 2nd, 1957. Melinda was 16 when she married Tom Jones at the Pontypridd Registry Office because a sudden pregnancy pushed them into adulthood sooner than they ever imagined. Her dress was borrowed, the ceremony was quiet, the pressure was heavy, but she stepped into the role with a kind of courage she didn't show on the outside. The marriage marked the beginning of a partnership that would carry them to places they never expected. Only months later, life grew even heavier. Just days after turning 17, she gave birth to their son Mark in a tiny flat in Treforest. The birth was difficult and left her with severe postpartum depression, a condition almost no one talked about in the 1950s. The small flat barely offered comfort, while Tom sang in pubs at night. She felt alone and overwhelmed, trying to care for a newborn while fighting her own shadows. Her pain went unseen by most people around her, and she forced herself through each day without the support modern young mothers receive. To help with money, she took a job at a thermometer factory in the Treforest trading estate. The conditions were awful. Chemical fumes filled the air and clung to workers' clothes. The hours were long and draining. She hated every moment. But Tom's income was unreliable, so her wages kept the family alive. Other women worked beside her with the same tired eyes and the same desire to push through another day. Melinda's determination carried her through the grind. Years later, when Mark grew older and left home, she suffered a miscarriage that ended her hopes of having more children. The loss stayed with her for the rest of her life. Tom revealed decades later that they always wanted a big family, but fate didn't allow it. The grief blended with long factory shifts and left a mark she never truly healed from. Melinda Rose. Linda stepped into factory life in the early 1950s, the way many young Welsh women did, but what set her apart was the purpose behind every tired breath she took. She worked full shifts at the Harris and Sheldon thermometer plant in Pontypridd, handling fragile glass that demanded steady hands and long hours. Each day felt the same, yet every week she held on to her £2 wage because she knew exactly where it needed to go. Her son, Tom, had been taking vocal lessons since he was 12, and those lessons were expensive for a family surviving on factory pay. Even so, she kept saving. Around 1952, the average woman in a British factory earned about £1.80 a week, so her £2 put her slightly above others, but it was still a struggle for a family chasing a dream. She kept showing up, even when her fingers ached, because she believed those lessons mattered. Once the mid-1950s arrived, her workdays grew heavier in ways people around her didn't always see. Women at the factory lived with constant sexism and unwanted comments, and those who became pregnant faced even worse pressure. When Melinda became pregnant again in 1954, she endured remarks from supervisors who made their disapproval clear. She feared losing her job, and that fear grew even sharper when she miscarried soon after. Factories offered no maternity leave. Women were expected to return without rest or step aside permanently. Only a small fraction of British women in 1955 received any form of maternity protection, and harassment went mostly unchallenged. Melinda carried that pain quietly, the same way many working mothers in post-war Britain had to do. As the decade shifted toward 1960, her hard work finally lifted her to the position of line supervisor. She now trained new recruits, mostly young Welsh women, in the careful work of assembling thermometers. It should have been a moment of pride, and in many ways it was. Yet the factory air carried a constant threat. Fine glass dust floated everywhere, and workers coughed more than they should. Tuberculosis cases in Pontypridd reached 17 in 1961, many tied to industrial exposure, and every worker felt the danger. Still, Melinda pushed ahead, helping her team stay safe while showing them how to master tasks that required patience and precision. Only 8% of factory supervisors in Wales were female by 1960, and she stood among them quietly and confidently. By the early 1960s, she was working more hours than she ever expected. Her overtime stretched into 60-hour weeks as she saved for a battered Morris Minor that cost £250. Buying that car in 1963 felt like holding a new kind of hope. A new Morris Minor cost around £365 then, so even the used one required months of sacrifice. Yet once she bought it, she drove Tom across South Wales for auditions, sometimes more than 100 miles in a single day. She did this because every mile meant another chance for him to be heard. That decision helped shape the path that took him to his 1965 breakthrough. When Tom's hit, It's Not Unusual, reached #1 in 1965, Melinda walked away from the factory for the last time. Leaving should have felt like freedom, but years of noise, dust, and repetitive motion stayed with her. She faced flashbacks to the workstations and the pressure of production lines, echoes that many former industrial workers carried. By 1966, more than 30% of former factory workers in Wales reported symptoms linked to trauma from their jobs. She recognized those feelings in herself, and they became part of her private world as she stepped into a new life shaped by Tom's rising fame. That same year, she left Treforest behind and moved with Tom to Los Angeles. The shift was overwhelming, but she tried to hold on to pieces of home. One of those pieces was the red phone box that stood at the end of their street in Treforest. They had spent countless hours talking inside it as teenagers, and instead of leaving it behind, they shipped it to their new Beverly Hills mansion. It stood in the garden as a reminder of their beginnings. Tom's first U.S. tour started in July 1965, and by the end of the year, he was performing at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas. Through all the noise of sudden fame, Melinda held on to that phone box to feel grounded. In their new Beverly Hills home, she found herself surrounded by stars who filled their mansion during late 1960s gatherings. Diana Ross, members of the Supremes, and other icons walked through the doors. But Melinda often hid the calluses on her hands, remnants of the factory years she carried with quiet pride. She tried to blend into Hollywood life, yet part of her always felt out of place. Homesickness followed her through the mansion halls. The house combined American luxury with hints of Welsh nostalgia, becoming both a safe haven and a reminder of everything she missed. To find some stability, she took a job at a local bank. It gave her independence and allowed her to handle the financial side of Tom's growing career. Early royalty checks came with complicated paperwork, and the IRS was already watching him closely. Her banking skills shielded the family from trouble and brought a sense of order during the unpredictable first years of fame. She protected their finances the same way she once protected her savings for his lessons back in Wales. At the same time, she raised their son Mark with the discipline she had learned long before Hollywood entered her life. She taught him punctuality, responsibility, and the importance of staying grounded. These qualities shaped him as he grew older, and by the 1980s, he had stepped into the role of Tom's manager. Melinda's quiet guidance helped him navigate a world full of pressure and opportunity. Her influence lived on through him, one careful decision at a time. To cope with the sudden shift from Wales to Beverly Hills, she built a small sanctuary inside the mansion. She turned a room into a private cinema, lined with classic films from her childhood. She watched those films often, using their familiar stories to steady herself when Hollywood felt too loud. That screening room became her retreat, a place where she could breathe, remember her past, and escape the weight of fame. It reminded her of the simple joys that shaped her early life. Her quiet strength was tested again as Tom's scandals began to surface. In 1968, he admitted to sleeping with as many as 250 women a year. Linda discovered the extent of his affairs through hotel receipts and backstage notes scattered across his belongings. One night, after confronting him, she hit him hard enough to leave his jaw bloody. He later said it was the only time she reacted physically, but even then, she never asked for a divorce. She knew what he did backstage. She chose to endure the pain the same way she once endured long shifts at the factory, separating each wound from the life she built at home. Tom's 2-year affair with Mary Wilson from the Supremes brought another layer of heartbreak. Melinda found Mary's love letters in his tour bag, yet stayed silent. Interracial relationships carried heavy judgment in America then, so the affair became public quickly. The tabloids reported it with relentless detail, and Melinda carried that pain quietly, refusing to confront Tom or respond to the press. She learned to fold her hurt inward and keep moving. Years later, in 1988, another painful chapter appeared. Tom had a brief relationship with Catherine Berkery that led to the birth of Jonathan Berkery. At first, Tom denied paternity, but in 1989, a court ordered a test that confirmed he was the father. Judge Judith Schindlin ruled that Tom must pay $33,500 a year in child support and more than $96,000 in additional costs. Melinda helped handle the fallout, even paying hush money to calm the situation. Still, Tom never formed a bond with Jonathan, who grew up feeling abandoned. Another of Tom's relationships brought a darker moment. Marjorie Wallace, Miss World 1973, tried to end her life after he broke things off. She took sleeping pills from his own bathroom, fell into a coma, and spent a week in intensive care. Melinda learned about it when she saw the tabloid headlines, which she burned immediately to erase the evidence. When she confronted Tom, she hit and kicked him, her pain spilling out in a way she rarely allowed. Tom later admitted Marjorie was the closest he ever came to loving someone else, yet he insisted Linda remained the one person he returned to. Across all these years, Linda followed an unspoken rule. She never questioned his affairs, never demanded explanations, never wrote to him on tour, and never tried to investigate the women who passed through his life. She kept her pain inside and protected the image of the marriage she held so tightly. Friends said she was incredible for carrying so much. She lived in silence, not because she was weak, but because she believed love demanded endurance. Their marriage lasted 59 years because she chose to bear the weight quietly, even when the world around them kept shifting. Linda's story began in the mid-1970s, when she was first told she had lung cancer. a time when survival rates were painfully low and treatments were rough on the body. She had been a lifelong smoker, and suddenly she was sitting through long months of chemotherapy that drained her strength piece by piece. Her hair fell out. She vomited often. Some days she could barely sit up. While she battled through those weekly cycles, Tom Jones was performing in Las Vegas almost every night, trying to keep his career steady while rushing home after shows to find Linda too weak to say much. He later said he felt helpless, watching her shrink to almost nothing as she lost more than 30 pounds. Yet she kept fighting and somehow survived, which doctors considered a miracle at the time because treatments were still so limited. When the early 1980s came, she had beaten cancer twice, each time using new treatments in Los Angeles that were still in their experimental stages. Cedars-Sinai had begun offering early forms of immunotherapy, and she tried whatever gave her the smallest chance. But every treatment left a mark on her lungs. Years of smoking and exposure to chemicals from her family's cinema business had already weakened them, and after the second cancer fight, emphysema arrived like another heavy blow. By 1983, she could feel her breath shortening. By the late 1980s, her lung function dropped to less than 40% of normal, and soon she relied on oxygen tanks just to move around the house. She was hospitalized more than once when her breathing collapsed into sudden distress, and each episode left her more fragile than before. Long before her lungs began failing, something else had broken inside her. In the early 1960s, she suffered a miscarriage that left her unable to have more children. The loss crushed her spirit and pushed her into a deep depression that changed how she lived. Tom later wrote that she withdrew into herself, preferring the quiet of home over any public moment. By the 1980s, she rarely left their Beverly Hills house. She skipped red carpets, skipped Grammys, skipped the world entirely. She stayed indoors watching old films for comfort, sometimes for entire days. Friends said she barely spoke to anyone outside the family. That silence became part of who she was, a shield she never set down again. The early 1990s only made things harder. Pneumonia struck her already damaged lungs, and she ended up in intensive care. Her condition became so serious that Tom canceled a major Grammy after-party in 1993 so he could stay at her side. She lay in bed for weeks afterward, weak and dependent on oxygen. Doctors warned that any infection could be deadly for her now. Tom missed concerts, events, and obligations because her health always came first. But the worry never eased because every winter felt like another danger waiting in the air. Even after her second remission in the late 1990s, she kept the news from their son Mark because she didn't want to distract him or affect Tom's career. She chose silence again, spending up to 12 hours a day watching classic films to distract herself. It became her way of coping. She barely spoke about her illness, and only the closest people knew. The secrecy wrapped her even tighter inside her reclusive world, and even though the cancer retreated for a time, her body never truly healed. From the outside, she seemed hidden, but behind closed doors, she carried enormous responsibility. Through the 1980s and beyond, she quietly managed Tom's growing fortune, which reached nearly £200 million. When Tom became a tax exile to escape the UK's crushing 98% income tax, she handled all the financial decisions. She invested in Los Angeles real estate with a calm, steady instinct, buying properties quietly and living modestly despite their wealth. Many fans never knew she was the mind behind Tom's financial success because she kept every decision in the shadows. She always acted like the same Welsh factory girl she once was. Even while guiding a fortune most people never imagined. She could have taken on a title after Tom was knighted, but she refused every offer. She said she was Linda Trenchard and didn't want to be called Lady Anything. She stayed home when Tom received his knighthood from Queen Elizabeth II in 2006 because the ceremony felt too grand and too far from the simple life she believed in. Her refusal made people admire her even more because it showed how firmly she stood in her own identity. Her love for Wales never faded, and over the years she built a private art collection dedicated entirely to Welsh painters. These paintings, worth millions, stayed hidden in the cinema room of their Beverly Hills home where only family could see them. She collected works by artists like Augustus John and Kyffin Williams, not to show off, but because they reminded her of where she came from. The collection became her private sanctuary, a quiet way to stay connected to her roots. She also shaped their son's future in her own steady way. She taught Mark the efficiency she grew up with, the discipline she learned long before fame entered her life. He later used those lessons to manage Tom's Las Vegas residencies and keep his father's career running smoothly. Her influence behind the scenes guided him until the end. But the 2000s brought another struggle when agoraphobia took hold. She rarely stepped outside and lived almost entirely within her Beverly Hills home. She made only one meaningful trip each year, returning to Pontypridd in Wales to sit in the cinema of her childhood. She would sit in the dark alone, letting the memories wash over her. It was the only place beyond home where she felt safe. The rest of the year she stayed indoors, surrounded by familiarity and the past. Then came March 2016, when Cedars-Sinai found a new tumor. Her third cancer diagnosis hit fast and hit hard. The doctors called it unusually aggressive and believed earlier radiation treatments had damaged the surrounding lung tissue, making everything more dangerous now. She had survived so much before, but this time her decline was swift. Tom said even the hospital staff were shocked by how fast her condition worsened over just a few weeks. Her family barely had time to understand what was happening before the cancer began spreading out of control. In her final 10 days, she stayed in bed, refusing strong painkillers because she wanted to stay clear enough to talk. Each night she whispered Welsh lullabies to Tom, the same lullabies she once sang to Mark. Even in her weakness, her voice held warmth. Nurses said it was rare for someone in such pain to turn down sedation, but she wanted every remaining moment to be real. Those days were filled with soft music, quiet words, and the last pieces of a lifetime of love. She didn't want visitors. She saved her strength for her family. She dictated her will and made one unusual request. She wanted the red phone box from the street where she and Tom fell in love to be sent home to Treforest. They had moved it to Los Angeles years before, but she insisted it return to the museum in Wales. It arrived there in May 2016, exactly as she wished, becoming part of the place where their story began. It was a final gesture from a woman who never forgot where she came from. As her condition worsened, she drifted into hallucinations, calling out to her father, William, and describing scenes from the old cinema of her childhood. Tom said she smiled during these moments, sometimes laughing at dialogue only she could hear. The visions gave her comfort. They let her slip into memories where she felt safe and close to the people she loved. Even in her final days, she tried to take care of her family. Through the haze of morphine, she reviewed documents and signed off on Tom's last major tour dates, so Mark would inherit a legacy worth around £10 million. Nurses helped guide her hand, but the decision was hers. Tom called it her final gift to their son, a way to secure his future even as her own life slipped away. On April 10, 2016, she died at Cedars-Sinai at 75 after a short but fierce battle with metastatic lung cancer. Tom canceled his international tour dates and stayed with her until the end. She had faced emphysema, depression, and more than one cancer, but this last fight overwhelmed her quickly. Fans only knew pieces of her story because she stayed so far from the spotlight, yet those closest to her spoke of her strength long after she was gone. Her funeral was private, just as she wanted. No cameras, no media, only the people she loved. Afterward, her ashes were scattered in Treforest, the place where she and Tom first met as children. Tom kept a small portion with him for comfort, but most of her returned to the soil where her story began. Before she died, she told Tom something that stayed with him. She told him not to die with her and to carry on. Those words inspired the song "I Won't Crumble With You If You Fall," released in 2021. The lyrics came from that moment, carrying her strength and his promise in every line. After her death, it became known that she had long been aware of Tom's affairs, yet she stayed for the sake of the love they shared before fame changed their lives. Tom admitted to hundreds of affairs throughout their 59-year marriage, but Linda valued their early bond more than the chaos fame brought. She reacted only once, striking him after learning of a very public scandal, yet she never stepped away. Tom later called her the love of his life and said her loyalty gave him the courage to keep going.